Hey guys, this is John, and today I'm reviewing Chess Structures, a Grandmaster guide by Grandmaster Mauricio Flores. And I thought to start out this review, I would just take a look at Mauricio's FIDE profile so we can get better acquainted with the author. So the author of this book is a Grandmaster from Chile. His current FIDE rating is 2531, born 1990, so he's in his mid-20s. And this is a guy, he actually studies at the University of Minnesota here in my home state. And I got to know him maybe a couple years ago when he first came here. He's pursuing a PhD in mathematics there, so very sharp guy. And a couple years ago, he told me that he was writing this book for Quality Chess, which is a very reputable publisher in the chess world. I could say without any reservations that Quality Chess is the best chess publisher in the game right now. I think they make the highest quality books. And Mauricio told me that he was writing this book, and I was really impressed because I knew he was pursuing his PhD and taking a lot of time to do that and not really having much time at all to play chess. And he was kind of saying like, oh, well, I can always make time to write this book. Like I just work on my academic stuff throughout the day, and then at night I just go and grind out several hours of writing. So I was very impressed by that. And of course, I wanted to see the final product when it was published. And it was just published, I believe, a month or two ago. And Mauricio was nice enough to send me a review copy, which is what I'll be reviewing here. So he is the #3 player in Chile. And yeah, he awarded his Grandmaster title in 2009. Pretty steady progression, actually. FIDE Master 2005, IM 2007, GM 2009. He actually competed on a team in Texas, the University of Texas at Brownsville, which was a rival of the school that I went to, University of Texas at Dallas. So I kind of know him through the college chess scene several years ago. Let's take a look at the book itself, and I'm just pulling up the Amazon page here to do that. So here it is on Amazon, apparently published on April 7th, 2015, so very recent, just about a month ago, and it's currently retailing for $23.29 here in the US, which I think is a very reasonable price. These quality chess books are very well put together. I was about to say very high quality, but I should use a different adjective to describe them. But they're just sturdy books, and even the paperback is very nice paper. Looks great on a bookshelf. Yeah, really no complaints in that department. And Quality Chess is notorious for their detail they put into writing and editing their books. They seem to vet their authors very well. I know the main Quality Chess guy, Jacob, I'm going to butcher his name. I'm just going to say it Agard. It's not Agard, but it's Aagaard. A Danish guy, but he has very high standards for his authors and also the books that they put out. And this Grandmaster Repertoire series, I don't think this is part of it, but there's basically a Grandmaster Repertoire series dedicated to openings. That's probably where Quality Chess first became a household name in the chess publishing world. And they've been doing good work for quite a while now. So as you can see, the reviews of this book have already been pretty positive. Here is the Quality Chess website where I got the PDF excerpt from this book, which we are going to take a look at now. So let me switch over to that. Yeah, here we go. So I just downloaded this from the Quality Chess website. And a few particulars about this book. So it is 464 pages. It has 140 full games that Mauricio annotates. And it has 50 training exercises as well, which come at the very end of the book in a separate chapter. 24 chapters in total. It also has a very nice index, which I've actually found lacking in many books that I've read from other publishers. This has a complete index. You can just look up a name and you can find it. In fact, because I'm slightly narcissistic, I looked up my name just out of curiosity, and I found one game. I actually have a game that Mauricio annotated in this book. So just an overview of the contents. This is a pretty varied type of material on offering, actually. So the idea of this book, and he talks about this in the preface, is that he wants to explain chess positions via typical pawn structures. So the way the book is organized is via pawn structures. And he kind of splits them into families. I believe there's, how many families? 5? Yeah, 5 families. So first we have d4 followed by d5, open Sicilians, Benonis, King's Indians, French. So those are the main family types of pawn structures that he focuses on. And he also has a miscellaneous section where he talks about lots of different structures. Majority structures, minority, majority, Panov, Dragon, Shevenigan, Benko, Closed, Roy Lopez, all that good stuff. So that's kind of a catch-all chapter for things that didn't make the other chapters. One reservation I had about this book going into it, which was quickly dissuaded when I started reading it, is a lot of times these books based on pawn structure and strategic chess have like an abundance of material that is geared towards D4 players. Simply because D4 tends to produce more static pawn structures than like E4 openings by contrast. But once I started taking a look at the material, I realized that it's pretty finely balanced. So he does talk about typical structures that result from D4, like the Isolani, hanging pawns, and then opening specific structures like the Carlsbad formation, which is in the Queen's Gambit declined, Stonewall, stuff like that. But he gets into it right away in the next family with Najdorf, so he dives right into mainline Sicilians and starts discussing plans there. Hedgehog, Maroxy, kind of goes back, circles back, and talks about other D4 type positions with Benoni and King's Indian, and then moves on to the French. And Mauricio's stated goal in this book was to focus on, I'm just going to try to scroll down to where he talks about this. He really wanted to focus on clear games with a minimum of tactical complications. Like most of these games that he gives are very straightforward tactical displays, if at all. And he really tried to filter out a lot of works or a lot of details that might otherwise distract from the overall arc of the strategic presentation. So yeah, you can see it right here. Chess Structures, a Grandmaster Guide, emphasizes clarity, precision, and completeness over generality. I do not intend to teach rules applicable to every position. Such rules typically do not exist. Moreover, even if such rules existed, the chance that such a complex message will be misunderstood is far too high. My aim is to provide an easy-to-understand strategic guide to the most frequently occurring classes of positions. And he goes on to talk about what types of positions he looks at. One thing that was very impressive about this book is that the games that he looks at are mostly recent games. I would say in the past like 5 years. He really made a point to look at games that are fresh, games that have not been done to death by other strategic books. You won't open up this book and just see examples that you've seen in Hans Kamak's book on pawn structure, for instance. They're very new games, and he made a real effort. I think he said in the introduction that he looked at 20,000 games. He worked through 20,000 recent games to assemble the final 140 games that he annotated. So going down to just the excerpt they have, this is an excerpt from chapter 13, just to give you the general layout. So this is the symmetric Benoni. And what he does is he starts the chapters with just the bare bones pawn structure that he'll be talking about in that chapter. And then he discusses the plans along with it. And I'll give you an example from the French chapter in a second, but he kind of talks about just how this comes about. And he discusses the plans for the respective sides. Doesn't include the pieces in it as he does it, but he just works off of the structure because that's like the bare bones thing that he's trying to flesh out with this book, the structures. Now, going to the Annotated Games, this is actually an example of an older game. This one is from Spassky versus Fischer, 1992, their rematch. The way he has it, it's not just a straight annotated game. He gives these learning objectives at the beginning of each game. And this one just has a simple one. This game illustrates how White's kingside expansion can totally suffocate Black's forces. But some of these learning objectives are multiple bullet points long, and he does this for each and every game. And then he discusses, and a lot of the diagrams I noticed were strategically placed to revert back to the initial chapter diagram. So if you see the pawn structure here, looks identical to the one that is discussed here practically. So he uses that as a vehicle, these games as a vehicle to flesh out the overarching pawn structure. And then at the end of each game, if we go down a little bit, he has final remarks. I wonder if this one might have got cut off, but yeah, final remarks right here. So And these can stretch on for a while too, but he kind of brings it full circle and he talks about the things that you were supposed to have picked up on from those games. I'll just choose one at random. I believe Black's biggest mistake was choosing to play this type of structure under unfavorable conditions. In recent years, White has scored over 80% from the position after Queen d1. This should tell us something. That's another thing too. He wasn't afraid to get into theory in this book. He would let you know about like certain lines and positions because he's annotating the entire games, not just portions of the games. But he would not be afraid to tell you like what his opinion about the theory of certain lines were. He didn't pull any punches there. So that's the way the book is organized. And you can look at this excerpt on the Quality Chess website. Don't think I forgot anything here. So now let me go to my handy dandy chess.com board. And we are going to look at some specific examples from this book. First, I'll start with just a little position from the, it's actually from the French chapter. And I see the chess.com board is actually not going to let me set this up. So I'm going to do this just by hand right now. So this is from the French Type 1 chapter. She considers to be basically like the seminal structure in the French. And he uses this example to explain the themes. I figured there might be a snag with converting chess-base to chess.com and whatnot. So basically, this is the pawn structure, and he excludes the kings. You can ignore that for our purposes. And here's what he says. This is on page number 353, chapter 19. He says, this structure often arises from the French and Caro-Kann defenses after Black challenges White's pawn chain with the typical f7, f6 break. So you can see that there was a missing f-pawn here. He says, the most important theme in this position is the control of the e5 square. If White is able to gain firm control over this square, his position will generally be superior. For this reason, Black must find counterplay rather quickly in order to avoid being dominated. Black's counterplay will usually be based on attacking White's d4 pawn. For this reason, Black will typically play c takes d4 rather than c5, c4, so he's implying that this pawn will come up here and take on d4, which would release the tension on the d4 pawn and thus allow White to have a solid center. Specific plans are as follows. And then he gives White's plans and Black's plans. And I won't include everything, but first thing he says for White is he says, control the e5 square and use it as an outpost for a knight, although a rook or a bishop would also be powerful on this square. He also says, pressure the backward e6 pawn by doubling rooks on the e-file. If White has already gained control of e5, then expand on the king side, possibly with f4 or h4, h5 in order to create an attack. And then for Black, he gives more detailed plans. For Black, it's a little more complex here. He says, all Black's plans are essentially based on preventing White from controlling the e5 squares. They are pressure the d4 pawn, play c takes d4, knight c6, and sometimes queen b6. Another one he says is bring the light square bishop into the game with bishop d7, because usually the bishop's on c8, so bishop d7 to e8, and then to either h5 or g6. Since White typically has a knight on f3, a bishop on h5 would produce an unpleasant pin against White's queen on d1, while also undermining the d4 pawn. So those are the type of things like he'll say at the beginning of each chapter. And then he'll go into the specific games and discuss the details. Next, one thing I really like about books is if I can just open up a book, and me as an IM who does chess like practically every day, if I can like immediately pick out a couple things that are useful to me or new, I just love that. Like I'm almost immediately on a book that sells me that, because when you're in chess for a while and you get used to seeing the same type of things over and over again, same type of chess writing, same positions, it tends to become a little bland at certain points. And when you encounter a book like this, or any resource really, it could be a video, could be like an article you read online, and it stops and makes you think, that's something that I would consider spending money on, because I want to get that new information. So here, this is an example he gives in, I'm going to go to the chapter right now, the Caro-Kann formation chapter. So I'm going to fast forward to the position in question. So this is a position he gives right now, and it's in chapter 3, the Caro-Kann formation. This is a game Ivan Isavic playing White versus Ashchich, I think I said that right, probably not, from 2007. The learning objective for this game, he says, this game is an example of the advance c4, c5 in order to gain control of the d6 square and to fix the center, also preventing black from releasing his position with c6, c5 himself. So, and in this game, it arose from I'll just flick through the moves at the beginning, d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, c6, g3, kind of like a Catalan style position, and one in which black never takes the pawn on c4. They try to maintain a stronghold on d5. White plays knight d2, rook e8, white breaks with e4, and now we've established this structure that he wants to discuss in this chapter, the Caro-Kann formation with pawns on e6, c6. And you see it didn't necessarily arise from a Caro-Kann, it's just the Caro-Kann pawn formation. Now, I bring this game up because astute viewers and subscribers to my channel will know that I actually had this position in a game I played on April 27th, I believe. I think it was released in the video the next day on April 28th. This is a game I played in the 15-minute category against this guy, Chess Tempo 2 was his name, and we reached this exact position that was also reached in this Ivan Isavic versus Ashchich game. And here, I playing white, I hadn't read this book yet. My opponent had just played knight f6, and I decided that knight c3 was the way to go in this position. And in the postmortem, I was kind of patting myself on the back and saying like, oh, look at how I avoided a trade of pieces that would reduce black's potential for getting out of this bind, because black has certain troubles developing his light square bishop and freeing his position in general. He has less space. So in playing that game in the 15-minute pool and also in the analysis later, I really liked my move knight c3, and I didn't really give it a second thought. I just thought to myself, this is what I know as a chess player to be a good move. Don't trade pieces with your opponent when you have a space advantage. Make them work for every trade. But lo and behold, I'm reading Mauricio's book, and I stumble upon this game. And guess what? Mauricio gives the move c5 an exclamation point. And in fact, it's like the focal point of this game. And let me read to you what he says about this c5 move. He says, as a young chess player, I was very puzzled by moves like this. My strategy books had taught me that c4, c5 was a colossal positional mistake, since the d4 pawn would be permanently vulnerable as a backward pawn, and the d5 square could easily be controlled by a black knight. This is all true, but in this pawn structure, the c4, c5 move has far more benefits than drawbacks. This move fixes the center structure, permanently banning the c6, c5 break, and locking in black's light square bishop. In addition, the d6 square becomes accessible to a knight, and clearly white's knight on d6 would be far more powerful than black's knight on d5. Finally, white secures a stable spatial advantage, and the d4 pawn is easily defended in the current position, though it could become vulnerable if white did not proceed correctly. So in just reading that explanation right there, that roughly 2-paragraph explanation, it really keyed me into the benefits of this c5 move. And I did know about c5 from previous positions, but the fact that he was able to turn my personal evaluation on its head, and I could apply it directly to a game I had played recently, really caught my eye. I think you're always going to identify with books more when like you play the lines they're recommending, or you get into the positions that they discuss, or you've seen them in games. So this game proceeded after c5, knight d5, so black occupied that center square. And Flores actually says that black is not helped by knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, bishop f6, because after bishop e5, white controls the board. And he gives a sample line, g6, queen c2, queen e7, rook d1, bishop g7, rook d3. Notice that black still has trouble with their light square bishop. That pawn on c5 has a real cramping influence. Rook d8, rook f d1, bishop d7, queen c3. Here white is threatening to take on g7, followed by a discovered check, d5. Bishop f8, and now h4. And he says white is clearly better. More space, and he's expanding on all areas of the board. So going back to the game, black jumped into the d5 square instead, but after bishop d6, b6, queen a4, hitting the pawn on c6, b5, queen c2, a5, rook fe1, bishop f8, a trade of bishops on f8, and finally knight d6. He said white had an obvious advantage and went on to win. And I fully agree with that, because this knight on d6 is an absolute monster supported by the pawn. Black's knight is also on a good outpost square, but in contrast, it's not creating as many threats. It's not as deep into white's position as the white knight is into black's position. Moreover, white has the option of taking this knight whenever they want. And black's light square bishop is still a problem. So this was just a game that caught my eye and caused me to learn something new from this. The final example I want to look at is from another game. We go to that one. This is a game Wojciech versus Fedorov. This is from 2012, so fairly recent. And the position in question is right here. This is from the chapter King's Indian Type 2. It's page number 283 that this game pops up on. It's chapter 15. And the learning objective for this game is says this game is an example of white's f2, f4 reaction against black's recapture with g takes f5. So if I back the position up just a couple moves, so this is a fairly fixed pawn structure, which Mauricio definitely favors in this book. He likes fixed structures because we can talk about the strategic ideas without worrying about fluidity and stuff like that. So fixed structure where black broke with f5, which for King's Indian players is as natural as a baby smile. So breaking and trying to disrupt white's play in the center by attacking e4. So after f5, white took with the pawn and black took with their g-pawn. And I really liked his explanation here, so I'm just going to read it for you guys. So he says, this position has occurred in a total of 6 games, and white scored 4.5 points. So we may guess white's position is somewhat preferable. Let's examine the position. Black has captured on f5 with the pawn in order to prevent white from installing a powerful knight on e4. This gives rise to a generally complex position. And he says black may attempt to, and then he gives 3 things that black might attempt to do. 1, weaken white's kingside with h7, h5, h4. 2, transfer his queen and rook to the h-file with attacking chances, probably something like this, and then queen e8 to h5. And then 3, play e5, e4 in order to open the h8, a1 diagonal and gain potential outposts on d3 and f3. So he describes black's plans from this position. Then he says, as previously mentioned, white will often choose between playing f2, f3 or f2, f4. In this case, the choice is relatively simple since f3 would block the bishop on g2. As the reader may note, white's pieces are not well arranged to pursue other plans, such as b2, b4. Hence, the game continued with h3, knight f6, f4, e4. And here he says, this reaction, e4, is pretty much forced in most positions, and now we reach a critical moment in the game. White has only one good plan, which is to prepare the pawn break g3, g4. Meanwhile, black must prevent this plan, or he will face a formidable kingside attack. The following moves are rather thematic, but the order in which they are executed can make a dramatic difference. Hence, they deserve careful calculation. So again, he's setting the stage, laying the foundation for what both sides would aim for in this structure once each e4 is played. By contrast, he says that if e takes f4, g takes f4, white takes with the pawn, he says white has a slight advantage because he will be able to make better use of the g file due to his spatial edge, and black's knight is fairly useless on a5. And I think I'll refrain from showing you the rest of the moves because it actually was fairly complicated here. But that little sequence and the discussion that surrounds this sometimes seemingly innocuous type of decision, you know, like taking on f5, like it's just a pawn capture. Like you might be thinking, like, what implications does that have? Just trading pawns. Well, actually, it's quite a lot of implications because that sets the stage for the resulting pawn structure. And whether you're white or black, you want to know the typical ideas going into that. So that type of informative explanation and prose is just super common throughout the book. I really like this book because he focuses on straightforward explanations and he doesn't really get bogged down with tactical details and bamboozling you with sidelines. It's all very straightforward stuff. The prose is excellent. The English is spot on. And overall, I give this book my full recommendation. I think it's money well spent for you guys if you decide to do this. And unlike like repertoire books, for instance, I would wholeheartedly recommend this book to players of any opening persuasion. And I don't want to say of any rating. I think this is a little bit advanced. I probably should have thought about this prior to making the review, like what rating range I would recommend this to. I would say if you're a tournament player, this book is going to be tremendously useful for you. If you don't play tournaments and are kind of like getting your foot in the door in that sense, you can still buy this book and will find a lot of useful stuff. Just be aware that a lot of the strategic ideas that are presented might be slightly over your head right now. And until you master some basics, you might want to refrain from really getting too deep into this. And by basics, I mean being like tactically sound, addressing a lot of the stuff that I mentioned in like my chess fundamentals videos. So I would conservatively recommend this to tournament players, but in reality, if you are a chess player who at all wants to get better, you can't go wrong by buying this book. It's a really, really good one. So that's about it. This is a slightly shorter review than normal, but if you guys have any questions about this book or my review, please leave them in the comments. I'll also invite Mauricio to show up in the comments if he can answer any specific questions. So thank you guys for watching this review. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.